This is Truman the Grey Merchant. Welcome to Part 2 of the Complete Magic Story Retrospective. Year 1994. Let's begin. The Duelist is a magazine with terrible graphic design, but some neat articles. The early articles have a throw-at-the-wall attitude that results in creative article concepts. From a story perspective, the first issue is very interesting. It starts with an in-universe introduction to the premise of Arabian Nights. It's presented like a middle schooler's PowerPoint, but I like the idea. An article on the philosophy behind expansion sets is one of the first times that the multiverse is discussed, then called Dominia. An article on a multiplayer variant format is introduced with a short narrative. Finally, there's Duel for Dominia by Steve Bishop, an in-universe adaptation of a specific tournament game. The concept is novel, but I find the execution to be overwritten and dull. Given that it's a direct representation of a game of Magic, there are a lot of direct references to elements of the game, such as creatures, lands, and specific spells. The Pocket Player's Guide has two short story articles by Richard Garfield. The first, Dominia and its Walkers, introduces basic concepts of Magic's world building. I'm going to almost immediately break my no going into detail about reference material rule, since this one is so essential. It begins by describing the multiverse, which is made up of planes full of people mostly unaware of other worlds. The exception to this is planeswalkers. Notably, planeswalkers are powerful wizards who have learned how to travel between the realms. The concept of an innate planeswalker spark has yet to be developed. Planeswalkers are described as materialistic and jealous. The physical distance between planes is important. As the further away a plane is, the more complicated, time-consuming, and dangerous it is to try and travel to it. The paths between planes are varied and ever-changing, similar to today's Omen paths. Even at this early point, planes are depicted as having different perceptions of magic and natures of reality. The significance of the 5 basic lands and how their lines provide mana are explored. Planeswalkers are further cast in a negative light, described as individualistic and territorial, impossible to regulate, and forever locked in combat with each other. Oraka's tale is a more traditional narrative. It sees the return of Wozel from the previous year's short story Introduction. She's on the wilderness plain of Urgamon, accompanied by Rorica. Rorica is some kind of fantastical beast. They're on the lookout for the lines described in the previous article. Interestingly, their story portrays a slightly softer version of planeswalkers. Rorica speculates that wizard duels are secretly elaborate playfighting, though it's also said that they're stuck in an endless cycle of preliminary strikes. Wozel is alerted to the presence of Thomel, her opponent from her first appearance. Wozel begins to gather mana, which bizarrely now requires braiding lines. She uses this mana to summon Scrib, who are aware enough to remember past interactions. Wozel also summons a bear. Strangely, both the Scrib and the bear require a glowfly to lead them into battle. Thomel again uses black magic, which is again looked down upon. Wozel is unable to find her white line, which may be a representation of Mana Screw. The battle escalates, culminating in Thomel summoning a dangerous Lord of the Pit. Fortunately, Wozel finds her white lines, which she uses for protective magic, which causes the demon to turn on its master. Thomel is forced to abandon the battle, conceding to Wozel. Interestingly, the demon lingers on for a while. The story is okay. It's more developed than Wozel's first story. The problem is that the planeswalkers aren't really fighting for any particular reason, so their duels lack stakes. Rorica's presence mitigates this a little bit, as she isn't a wizard, meaning she could conceivably be in danger, but the reader doesn't learn enough about her to feel true concern. The Duelist supplement contains an introduction to Antiquities, presented in the form of a bitter in-universe debate between two historians, offering opposing theories on the historic Brothers' War. The assumed basic details are similar to what we later see. Urza and Mishra started as apprentices to Tokasia. They discover the might and weak stones respectively in Koilos. The pair devote themselves to artificery and their rivalry grows. One odd detail is the possibility that Ashnod was involved in a love triangle between the two brothers. Urza allies with Krug and works with Tanos, while Mishra works in Zegon with Ashnod. The two sides battle, resulting in millions of deaths and the scouring of Terisier. Hercule and Latneum are there. The war ends on Argoth, with Urza defeating Mishra and both brothers disappearing from Dominaria, possibly from planeswalking. The framing device is very interesting, especially when compared to the set Antiquities, which is also presented as being a much later investigation into the Brothers' War, not the event itself. It is a bold choice to depict the story so indirectly, but the gimmick is committed to so wholly that a player could probably grasp the gist of it just by looking at the cards. However, I do think that the continued practice of real-world flavor text clashes with the objective of establishing a specific story. The set introduces some ongoing story threads, most notably the Phyrexians and Yawgmoth. Their connection to the story is not made clear at this point, and I'm curious if Wizards had a specific one in mind yet. Legends was based on the Dungeons & Dragons campaigns of its designers. It is notable from a story perspective because it introduced legendary creatures and lands to the game, used to signify specific characters and locations respectively. This would be a major development in Magic storytelling, as later sets would have major characters from the story appear directly as cards. However, Legends was not released alongside a story. Strangely, there are not many connections made between the legendary creatures or between the legendary creatures and other cards. There are only a handful of connections, like some of the flavor texts of legendary creatures mentioning legendary lands, and Lady Orca's flavor text mentioning Angus. I feel this is a missed opportunity to make the world of the set feel more fleshed out and less generic. The frequent real-world quotations in flavor text also get in the way of the world building that the set is meant to evoke. Relatedly, many legendary cards don't have flavor text despite ample space for it. Issue 2 of The Duelist also features an introduction to a recent set, in this case, The Dark. You're still really committed to Papyrus Font, huh? The introduction is a narrative centered on Mindril and Brand, two planeswalkers. They're preparing to battle an unnamed challenger for the Outer Ring. Brand is tempted to use the titular dark magic, which ultimately destroys him. We get an interesting explanation on how, even though black is the most obviously vicious color of Magic, all colors have a dark and dangerous side. The story is more interesting than most from the early period of the game, because it's more of a philosophical discussion of magic rather than a rote description of it in action. This perspective on the darker side of each color is also demonstrated in the set itself. White's religious corruption, blue's watery nightmares, red's fanaticism, and green's monsters all get plenty of attention. This mission is combined with appropriately creepy art, resulting in one of the most creatively cohesive early sets. The set continues the practice of real-world flavor text quotes and direct references. The Duelist issue also contains part 1 of Mezloc's Challenge, the first in-universe Magic comic. It is about Mezloc, a planeswalker duelist, and his servant, Teixeira. I love that we've had 2 servant narrators who are absolute freaks now. Are planeswalkers obligated to team up with a hybrid monstrosity? Anyway, the pair arrive for the contest on the planet of Marinkar, which I'm going to say is home to Vedalken. The arrangement of the text bubbles is odd. I think you're supposed to read it like this, but you have to think about it, which breaks the immersive flow. Mezloc is unlikable. He and Teixeira look for a city to choose Mezloc as its champion. Meanwhile, a blue guy negotiates. Mezloc is chosen as the village's duelist, but a local objects. Mezloc lightning bolts him. The end for now. Issue 3 of The Duelist has an introduction to Fallen Empires. It's comparable to the Antiquities intro, as it is also framed as historians looking back at an earlier event. However, in this case, we are given primary documents with minimal interpretation. Said documents are letters from the 5 titular empires depicting their decline.
I don't respect epistolary content.
The dwarves of the Crimson Peak are beset by goblins and orcs. They send a letter asking the elves of Havenwood for help. The elves are preoccupied fighting the Thalids they originally bred for food, so they forward the request to Acadia. The Vordalian merfolk send a letter to Acadia thanking them for their gift of arms for use against the Homerids, but say that they are unable to continue sending medical supplies in return and request food. We get foreshadowing of the Ice Age, with multiple references to the weather getting colder. Acadia, dealing with a priestly rebellion, do not have the resources to help the Crimson Peaks, so they forward the request to the Order of the Ebon Hand. The Order agree to help the dwarves with the mercenary Ivra Yorsdaughter. They are currently dealing with the thralls, which they created for their dark religion. Finally, Crimson Peaks report that the mercenary forces joined in with the goblins and orcs, who will soon destroy the dwarves. This section is followed by a description of the world and story of the set. It also notes that 80 common cards from the set have alternate arts and flavor texts to provide more art and more of the storyline behind the expansion. I think this was a cool idea, which, when combined with all the flavor texts being in-universe, allowed the set to tell a clear story. It's a broad story of civilizations more so than individual people, but it's better presented than any set story that we've seen so far. Legendary creatures aren't used, but multiple characters appear across several flavor texts and in the introduction, most notably Ivra. The presentation of the kingdoms collapsing is quite harrowing, and I enjoy the implications of the differing relationships between each of the factions. If I had one complaint, it would be that between the 5 empires, 2 are facing invasion and 2 are facing an internal war with their own creations. I wouldn't have minded more variety in the premise. There's also a lack of stylistic consistency in the world building. For example, the Morfolk look different on almost every card. Later on in the issue, another new game mode is introduced with accompanying lore. This time on Antalgia, a plane torn apart by ever-dueling mages. The game mode is comparable to Plane Chase, with each location being a realm on the plane, complete with a snippet of lore. The issue also contains Part 2 of Mizlok's challenge. It features specific cards and the return of Line Weaving, which Mizlok uses to defeat the challenger from the first part. Then we see a little of how the contest operates. The end. Like, the actual end of the story. It never continued. When is Wizards going to finally resolve this epic cliffhanger? Arena, by William R. Forstchen, was the first ever Magic novel. It features a fascinating look into some of the setting's earliest world building. It's also quite terrible. The book centers on the mysterious Garth One-Eye's quest to dismantle the gladiatorial festival system. In many ways, the novel serves the same purpose as most of the short stories we've already looked at, showing the in-universe magical duels that a game of MTG represents. We even see that the game Magic the Gathering exists within the world of Magic the Gathering. Does Magic the Gathering exist within the world of that Magic the Gathering? There's a big focus on spells being individual items that are collected, similar to how Magic cards are, which here are contained in amulets kept in satchels. Every mage in this book is running around and fighting with a tote bag full of rocks. Introduction also depicted the collection of spells, but presented it as knowledge as opposed to physical items that you have to lug around. The importance of mana as a power source also comes up often, on average once every 2 pages. One fighter experiences mana burn. When a duel ends, the loser must give the victor one of their spells, a reference to the old anti-system. Mages are aware of the colors of magic, with each of the 5 houses being named after an enemy color combination. This is interesting, as early Magic often had way more of a focus on the ally combinations. One character states that red and black mages are cooler than others, a less nuanced depiction than the later norm. There are many references to specific cards to varying degrees of accuracy. On one end, another Lord of the Pit is correctly shown as an imposing creature, but also consumes your own forces and turns on you if you can't keep feeding it. On the other hand, Llanowar elves are depicted as super physically imposing combatants multiple times. Where Arena differs from those short stories, in addition to odd elements like the amulets, is in tone. Arena, from start to finish, is just unpleasant. The world is unpleasant, the characters are unpleasant, the depiction of the narrative of the game are unpleasant. Let's start with the world. The setting is one of filth, cruelty, cynicism, and death. The author seems to have a very low view of humanity because the world is constantly portrayed as bloodthirsty, moronic, and fickle. I simply do not care what happens to this public because no one in it seems capable of empathy or critical thought. It's a bizarrely downbeat experience. Relatedly, the novel's representation of the game is very critical, arguably deconstructive, even more so than the short stories. The vast majority of the mages who stand in for Magic players are materialistic bullies, obsessed with increasing their spell collections at whatever cost. The book also suggests that sometimes it's smarter to forget all that Magic stuff and just run up and stab your opponent, which I do think the DCI frowns upon. Becoming a Planeswalker, a role which also represents the player, requires untold death and greed. And once one becomes a Planeswalker, their life is miserable. They exist in a black void, forever fighting off rivals for nothing. Such a dour take on the Magic meta-narrative, especially for the first ever long-form Magic story that I might have enjoyed it if the execution was better. Unfortunately, this edgy, dark tone extends to the novel's appalling depiction of women. Women are consistently and unambiguously used as flesh props for men. There are exactly 3 named women in this book. One falls in love with the protagonist immediately, despite him being awful to her. One has sex with the protagonist within 10 minutes of meeting him. One wants to have sex with the protagonist, but can't because she is a decaying lich. There are repeated references to assault and forced sex work, without any of the gravitas that those topics require. Elsewhere, sex workers are demeaned. So many times, women's bodies are used as rewards for male characters. Yes, this is sometimes to show that these characters are villainous, but it also frequently seems like we're supposed to find these interactions funny. Relatedly, supporting character Hammond repeatedly tries to ogle, grope, and otherwise sexually harass women. And it's always meant to be funny, but it's just uncomfortable. Potions to seduce a girl who won't say yes are repeatedly discussed and never challenged. A character that we're meant to empathize with attempts to procure one, and Hammond also jokes about Garth getting one. It's fitting that this author is a longtime Newt Gingrich collaborator, and this is all in contrast with the Magic sets of the era, which, while still dated, showcased multiple examples of comparatively complex and powerful women. Beyond the tone and the depiction of women, the book is just boring. Garth is a generic anti-hero. We get little insight into him as a person, and he doesn't have a personality. The book's plot points are excruciatingly repetitive. At least a dozen times, Garth gets into a magical duel, and everyone thinks that he's going to lose, but then he doesn't lose, because he's an epic genius who's 5 steps ahead of everybody else. At one point, he rips off a bunch of shirts in a row to trick different people into thinking he's a member of different groups, which is kind of funny, but not intentionally. The fights also aren't interesting. Everyone seems to have the same handful of spells. I know there weren't that many cards referenced back then, but there are more than the 8 or so that get endlessly repeated here. Plague gets used more than 10 times. Additionally, the driving mystery behind Garth's motivation is blindingly obvious. Would you be shocked to hear that the mage house that was betrayed and massacred 20 years ago, and the mysterious mage who wants revenge on all those betrayers, are connected? 2 other characters are also revealed to secretly have been members of that mage house, so it's possible that the obviousness of Garth's backstory is an intentional distraction from those twists, but I think that gives the book too much credit. I will say that occasionally the book manages to elicit some emotion from me by depicting a character's grief. The second Magic book was Whispering Woods, and I'll be honest, I don't know when it came out. The ISBN entry says 1994, but the copyright page says 1995. I found a Duelist write-up that implies it'll come out in 95. The MTG wiki claims both dates on different pages. I'm going to cover this in the next video, but I could be wrong. If you have a more conclusive source, please let me know. Conclusion. 1994's story material continued last year's mission to depict the game very directly. Duel for Dominia, Oreka's Tale, Mezlok's Challenge, Arena, and to a lesser extent, the introduction to The Dark and the Antalgia write-up all represent ritualized or organized magical duels. This got old. For most of these, the fighting is completely voluntary, which removes the stakes. This could be rectified if they featured compelling characters, but only Arena really tries this, to poor results. That said, the premises of Antiquities and Fallen Empires demonstrate that the sets can depict magical combat that isn't a literal game of magic. Instead, they feature epic conflicts between armies, and the final duel between Urza and Mishra is much more personal. Meanwhile, The Dark was the first example of a magic set really capturing a specific cohesive mood. However, the constants of the universe have not been nailed down yet. Terminology and the basics of how things like spells and mana work differ pretty significantly between stories. On the other hand, an area where growth was evident was in how flavor text improved in quality with time. Finally, planeswalkers and mages are often depicted quite negatively. Like I said in the past video, I'm going to choose a candidate from each story to receive a card. I guess Duel for Dominia's winner, Karshan, is the logical choice. He uses black and red mana. For Oreka's Tale, I already chose Wurzel last time, so I'll go with her foe, Thomel, who would likely also have a Rakdos color identity. For Antiquities, I'm not sure if there are any characters from the set who haven't been given a card yet, so I'll choose one of the bickering historians from the introduction because I think that's funnier. I think that Legends similarly doesn't have any characters without cards, so I'll go with my man, Angus McKenzie, one of the characters who has yet to be given a fresh new card. For the dark, I choose Brand, the idiot who got himself killed with dangerous magic. He can have an ability that involves sacrificing himself. Mizlok's challenge obviously gets Mizlok. I do have a soft spot for Taisher. Urva Yur's daughter is the clear choice for Fallen Empires, as she appears in the most flavor text. I'm surprised that she hasn't had a card yet. Finally, since Garth already has a card, I'll go with Noreen for Arena. She's one of the few characters in the book to merely be bland instead of gross. Plus, she's based on a fairly iconic alpha card. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy this series, please like and subscribe to support the channel. I don't plan to exclusively do these or anything, but I plan to come back to them periodically. Let's see how many stories came out in 1995. Oh boy. Have you read any of the stories from 1994? As always, thank you to my Patreons for helping make this channel possible.